The Russians are trying to build up a bridgehead across the Vovcha River to advance further. However, Ukrainian forces attacked them at the right moment and conducted a daring maneuver, not only to push the enemy back, but also to endanger their flank. Ukraine's goal in this sector is to neutralize the Russians in Ivanivka before they can dig in and outflank Novopavlivka. Clearing the enemy and recapturing Ivanivka would not only eliminate them from this side of the river, but once secured, these positions can also be used for exerting pressure on the flank and isolating other Russian units, further diminishing their offensive capability. The Ukrainian plan involved an element of surprise to catch the Russians off guard, deploy tanks to soften up their resistance inside Ivanivka by pinning them down with their firepower. Including the use of FPV drones in the preparation stage would allow the Ukrainian infantry to systematically sweep through the settlement and neutralize the remaining disorganized Russians, bringing it back under Ukrainian control. The main Ukrainian tactical advantage is the location of Ivanivka, as it is separated from the main Russian forces by the Vovcha River. Because of the weather and the proximity to the river, Ukrainians can also benefit from the dense fog, preventing the Russians from using drones, while allowing the Ukrainians to use tanks, which can provide stronger fire support. To keep Russian troops in Ivanivka supplied, everything has to be brought in across the river, which makes their logistics much more complicated. Furthermore, the Russian positions inside the village are too weak and too close to the front line to permit secure crossings of armored vehicles over the river, which means the Russians are unable to deploy such or even bring in significant forces with ease. As a result, the Russian assault groups found themselves overextended and without enough support to compensate for the unfavorable conditions, making them an easy target for the Ukrainians. Ukrainian forces launched their operation at a well-chosen moment, before Russian troops could establish themselves, attacking under thickening fog, which temporarily reduced the threat from Russian drones, and exploiting conditions that made it possible to use tanks in an environment where they are otherwise rarely employed. After the Russian positions were softened up, Marines of the 37th Brigade descended from the hills and started clearing the enemy dugouts in close-quarter combat, using small arms fire and explosives, while drones circled above and dropped grenades on the remaining Russian infantry. A large number of Russian soldiers were killed here, and several were taken prisoner. As a result, Ukrainian forces advanced 1.5 kilometers in a 5-kilometer wide area, clearing Ivanivka completely and pushed back the Russians behind the Vovcha River. Overall, Russian forces advanced into Ivanivka, hoping to establish a bridgehead over the river, only to land in a kill zone in the lowlands. Ukrainian Marines capitalized on the bad weather and used tanks to destroy the enemy contingent, left without an option to retreat. When the Russian High Command decides to assault in this sector again, they will meet an even bigger obstacle, as they would now have to cross the river again, facing an improved Ukrainian defense on high alert. At the same time, after capturing Ivanivka, the Ukrainians will be able to conduct raids on the flank and put the Russian salient to the east under constant pressure.
Fighters of the 42nd Brigade of the Ukrainian Armed Forces captured 3 servicemen of the occupying Russian army in the direction of the city of Pokrovsk in the Donetsk region. Realizing that they were in a desperate situation after the shells fired from the drone, the invaders demonstrated their intention to surrender and headed in the direction indicated by the drone. While moving towards the positions of the Ukrainian army, the Russian soldiers were fired upon by their comrades with artillery and mortar fire. The Russians, who said that they wanted to survive and surrendered for this, said that they joined the army because they faced the threat of arrest, but they were deceived by the military leadership. The captives said that they were well received by Ukrainian soldiers, provided with medical care and food. The captives, who approached other Russian soldiers, offered them to surrender in order to survive. The captives admitted that they were occupiers and shouted insults at Russian President Putin. East military grouping of Ukraine says that the defense forces are conducting search and assault operations and eliminating Russian forces within the urban areas of Pokrovsk. In Myrnohrad, Ukrainian units are holding defensive lines and eliminating the Russian forces on the approaches to the city. Additional logistical routes to Pokrovsk and Myrnohrad are being organized to ensure uninterrupted supply of everything necessary for Ukrainian units. Over the past day, units of the Defense Forces of Ukraine in the area of responsibility of the East Command repelled 82 assaults by Russian forces. In the Pokrovsk sector, Ukrainian defenders stopped 45 assault actions by the aggressor toward Novopavlivka, Novopavlivka, and in the areas of Hryshine, Chervoniy Lyman, Rodinsk, Myrnohrad, Kotlin, Yudakny, Molodetsk, and Dakny.
A disturbing new trend is emerging inside Russia, one that offers a chilling preview of what the country could face if the war were to end, as returning soldiers from the front carry out new mass shootings and vengeance sprees that decapitate their own military units. The Kremlin grows increasingly afraid that ending the war could trigger chaos it can no longer control. RFU News says, in the latest case, Russian authorities are searching for a serviceman who, shortly after returning from Ukrainian captivity, murdered 7 of his own comrades in what investigators describe as a planned act of revenge. The suspect had been released during a prisoner exchange and immediately signed a new military contract upon his return. His motive was to regain access to the same circle of men who had previously abused him. He was assigned to the 69th Division in Kamyanka, where he opened fire on fellow servicemen before fleeing. Security services have issued a wanted notice warning that he is armed and believed to be hiding in the Belgorod region. This incident is shocking, as it reflects a deep moral rot inside Russia's armed forces and the growing phenomenon of returning prisoners of war seeking vengeance against those who tormented them. The backdrop to this violence is a military culture defined by internal brutality, with Russian soldiers often tormented, humiliated, or even executed by their own commanders for minor insubordination like complaining about conditions or simply hesitating. RFU News claims an investigation in October 2025 documented 101 verified cases of Russian troops killing or assaulting their comrades. Leaked videos show beatings, electrocutions, and even forced gladiatorial fights to the death between punished soldiers, staged by officers as penance or entertainment. These practices revive the worst Soviet-era penal traditions. And despite Russian denials, the evidence is overwhelming and continuous. Nearly every week, new cases emerge of troops being abused by their own chain of command. This systematic brutality, intended to enforce discipline amid staggering casualties, has instead fostered chaos, mistrust, and paranoia inside the ranks. Soldiers now fear their commanders as much as Ukrainian fire, sometimes far more. This environment of abuse has made surrender a rational choice for thousands of Russians. In captivity, they discover a reality that contradicts every piece of Russian misinformation. Ukraine's I Want to Live hotline receives around 3,000 calls a month from Russian soldiers who want to defect or surrender. RFU News says Those who do are often surprised by humane treatment, which includes medical care, the ability to contact family, proper food, the compliance with the Geneva Conventions. UN monitors confirm that Ukrainian treatment of POWs meets international norms, starkly contrasting the torture chambers Russia runs in occupied territories. Many Russian prisoners of war openly describe a psychological shock. Abused by their own commanders, they find safety among those they were taught to see as enemies and Russophobes. Yet, Russian prisoners of war do not stay forever in Ukraine, and many are sent back in prisoner exchanges, returning to the very system that once mishandled them. For some, the return provokes rage, and they re-enter the Russian army looking for revenge, angry, and with nothing to lose. Historically, returning veterans in Russia have destabilized the system before and after World War II. Waves of traumatized Soviet soldiers contributed to spikes in domestic violence and crime. After the Soviet war in Afghanistan, embittered veterans helped fuel unrest that contributed to the collapse of the regime. The parallels are ominous. Hundreds of thousands of Russian soldiers would eventually return home with psychological scars, grievances, and violent conditions. The stark contrast between Ukrainians and Russians underscores the division, as Ukrainian prisoners are seen crying with relief, phoning relatives, singing the national anthem, and embracing freedom after being exchanged. Russian prisoners, by comparison, appear stiff, anxious, and performatively enthusiastic. Overall, the rising number of surrenders and violent incidents involving repatriated Russian prisoners of war exposes how Russian soldiers increasingly understand that they are disposable to their commanders. RFU News says, instead of being cannon fodder in a war that grinds their lives away, many prefer Ukrainian captivity, and when forced back through exchanges, some choose vengeance over submission.